And it's my pleasure to welcome to the Today's Leader podcast, Building Tomorrow's Best Leaders Today. Please welcome Chris Edmonds and Mark Babbit. How are you both?
Coach Carl, we could not be happier to be online with you, and we're a few days away from book launch. So as you can imagine, we've been running pretty hard.
Yeah, pretty exciting times with a book launch coming up. So with that, so Mark and Chris have co-written a book called Good Comes First. So share with the audience how that story came about and how you two came to work together.
Chris stalked me. That's the easy answer. No, not really. So Chris and I have been in the same culture circles forever. We had known each other on social media for years. And now, several years ago, 5 years ago, I believe it was now, we happened to show up at the same culture-focused conference in Chicago, where I was speaking, and Chris was kind enough to seek me out afterwards, and we ended up going for a steak, and we knew, I think, that night we were going to work on this book together and see if we could change some minds, change some hearts around the concept of culture, and that it didn't have to be as difficult as people were making it. And here we are today.
Excellent.
Well,
excellent.
And to add to that, Tony, we've been writing this book for 3 years, and much has happened in the world of business and in the world of families over the past 3
just a
years.
little bit.
And so it was interesting and fun to be able to ride some of those pretty tsunami-like waves if we look at perfect storm, and particularly as we arise now where so many businesses are having such trouble to kind of bring people back into the office. Not that that's a brilliant suggestion for every business, but this idea of leaders are going to have to change the way they manage their work cultures if they're going to be attracting really smart, engaged folks that can serve them for decades. So that's where it kind of has evolved. It's probably been a year that we've been working on this manuscript and getting such great feedback from editors. And again, we got the book like a month in advance. So we've got some hard copy books in our hands, and it's pretty cool to see that when you open up those packages.
Absolutely, I can imagine. I know when I wrote my book that the most exciting day was when the boxes showed up at the door and I was able to open them and look at them, and it's real. So it's interesting that the last 2 years with COVID and the pandemic has really put a highlight on culture. But even before that, culture was this thing that people talked about, people thought it was a good idea. The companies that did it excelled and were ultimately more successful. But I think from my experience, and I'm hoping that maybe it's mirrored by your experience, those companies are actually in the minority. And the majority of companies or the majority of businesses still find it a bit of a conundrum about culture. Is that something that you've seen?
Well, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things...
Sorry, go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that I learned, and I've been trying to help leaders get more savvy about culture and be more intentional about culture for about 25 years. And what I realized early on was I had to help them realize that culture by default is not going to necessarily lead them down a primrose path. That if you have people who are not sharing information, cooperative, interested in others' success, then you're going to have a very different culture than you would if the opposite was true. And so to be able to have leaders, typically, when there's some feedback, they get a morale survey that comes back with terrible scores. Oh my God, we have a bad culture. Let's have HR/OD fix it. And that doesn't work. It doesn't stick. It doesn't sustain. And so much of what brought Mark and I together was this alignment that we have to help leaders, senior leaders, business owners, to be able to say, no, not paying attention to the quality of culture is really going to hurt you.
And your thoughts, Mark?
Tony, I'll add this. Chris and I, when we started this book, and actually when we started our conversation over that steak, we said most cultures are unintentional. And the more we we worked on this book and the more research we did, we realized it was worse than that. It was accidental. Cultures were accidental. They might take on the personality or the working style of the founder or the leader or the guy that gets to take the town car to work every day. It might do that, but typically, especially in bigger companies, it takes on the department head personality or the VP's personality. So we end up having 12 accidental cultures instead of one purposeful, positive, productive culture that everybody can thrive within. And it was actually a surprise to us, especially we've been in this culture game, leadership game for a long time. And our clients we had seen, maybe we were just lucky, Chris, but our clients tend to be top-down culture change champions. And when the few times that has not happened, it has not gone well. And as we're researching the book and we're looking at all these amazing companies, the minority, clearly in the minority, that have these purposeful, intentional cultures, it was driven by one person. She sat at the top and said, this is how my company's going to function. This is how we attract new people. This is how we retain good people. This is how we filter out the people who don't align to the culture we want to have here. And the intentional cultures were inspiring. It was fun to watch how even the newest intern coming in could go, oh, I get it. I know. I feel like I belong here. I know what's expected of me. I know what to expect of others. I'm good here.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I've always had a saying that, it comes from the chair. So whoever's sitting in that chair is the one that ultimately becomes accountable, responsible, responsible for the culture. And while everyone in the organization has responsibility for living the culture, ultimately what I see within organizations, if you don't have that one person that understands what it's got to look like, what it's got to feel like, and drives that with intention, culture just is accidental. It's really interesting, that term, culture is accidental. I have never looked at it that way, but when you think about it, it's absolutely true and absolutely relevant.
It is, and what's interesting with most leaders, and again, we go back to looking at industrial age influences and having leaders, okay, here's your deal. You've got the throne, right? You've got the top chair, and you have to tell people what to do. You have to make sure they follow your rule. Don't let them, back talk you at all. It's very parental, and patriarchal, of course. But what we found is clients would come to us and say, this isn't working. We had this huge explosion. There's a question of ethics in our organization. We have to respond to this.
Yeah.
And those leaders have never been asked to change the culture. They've never been asked to really engage proactively in intentional culture creation. And so here we've got leaders who know there's a problem, who are interested in doing something different and have no idea what to do, no idea where to start. So our process is one that is very intentional, and we try and simplify the process. Culture's, vastly complex, but if we can boil it down to some simple steps, then leaders begin to nod their head and go, okay, this makes sense to me. And so that's what we've been able to do.
Culture is not the domain of HR, and that's not casting any sort of downsides on HR, but HR can't live and breathe a culture. They can help create it. And within their own department, they're going to have a responsibility and accountability for the culture. But they can't own the culture company-wide because of all the separate divisions. And it really does sit within each individual leader of all the silos or departments that you may have within an organization to own the culture and understand what it's about. I really like the fact that both of you talk about modeling the culture that you want. So when you see a good culture within an organization, and I might start with you, Mark, what does that modeling the culture you want look like and feel like? What are some of the things that you're seeing in organizations?
Well, first, I'll real quickly say that one of the first things we do in the book and one of the first things we do with our clients is we sit down and help them write down 4 or 5 uncompromising values. No matter what happens, no matter what comes across the plate, no matter what disaster we face, these are the 5 values that we're going to live by. And underneath those values are 4 or 5 behaviors that might demonstrate if somebody's living those values or not. So people know that it isn't some arbitrary, self-defined, open to interpretation value, that everybody seems has posted on their walls somewhere. These are values that you know exactly how we view them. You know exactly what they look like within our workplace. And we know, because they're so clearly defined, whether you're living those values or not. So that's the first step. Second step, Coach Carl, is we have to get the leaders to serve as chief role models. We can't have a leader that says, here's our 5 values, but I'm not going to live up to those today. If one of our values is integrity, but I need to make the third quarter report look better, I'm going to look the other way. That value doesn't matter that much to me right now. Something else is more important. Well, now we've lost trust. We've lost respect. We've lost momentum. And so if the leaders themselves, top down, don't model those values, they can't coach those values. And even if they try, now the word hypocrite seems to sneak into the culture, and that's not exactly a wonderful culture trait, right? So now once the leader, Tony, starts modeling those behaviors, now we look at each other and go, oh, that's actually working. I get it. And now I'm going to do that. Right. And now the team leaders are doing that. The middle managers are doing it. Now the employees are doing it. Pretty soon we have these contagious pockets of excellence where everybody's modeling these behaviors and we expect nothing else. And nobody's perfect, right? Even the best leaders have bad days. That also creates a sense of self-awareness where we go, you know what? I didn't live up to our values yesterday, and I'm going to own that, and I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to be more aware next time of, should that trigger come upon me again, I'm going to be more ready.
It's 100% true that what you're talking about, the modelling around the culture from the leaders, the first people that sniff it are going to be the people that report to that leader. If they're not seeing the values being lived, they're the first ones that see it. They're the first ones that sense it. Their bullshit meters are going off the charts, and they're going to realise that it's not as important as what the plaque on the wall says. And then we get this real disconnect about, are we living the values or do we just talk about the values? And I really like the concept of the behavioural statement, so to speak. This is the way that we behave in alignment with that particular value. And the minute that we start fraying around the edge of that commitment on behaviour is when, once again, we start to get that disconnect between what we're saying we're about and what we actually are about.
Well, and
is that something that you've seen, Chris?
Absolutely, Tony. The credibility piece is huge, and leaders really understand that they've got to be consistent, but all they've known to pay attention to are results. So, and again, every organization that we've been invited into looks, because the first question we kind of pose is, how clear are performance expectations and how well are people held accountable for them? And they go, pretty good and lousy. And again, it's that challenge of holding people accountable is really tough. But if that's the only thing as a leader that you are being asked to proactively manage and quote, get done, respect, civility, none of that matters. None of it's even relevant. So as Mark said, we help leaders behaviorally define values. So now again, it's not this lofty ideal. It's actually a visible, tangible, measurable behavior. And then we do the measurement. We invite leaders to all be rated by their direct reports, and in a lot of cases by indirect reports as well, that these are your 20 or 12 or 25 value behaviors. We're going to measure how well your players who work with you every day see you modeling these or not. And what that does, it's by the way, an impossible data point to ignore. So if you've got data that your direct reports believe you are in fact very well aligned with 90% of the behaviors, boy, good for you. We need to keep you here. We need you to keep coaching. Your role modeling is very positive. If you're seen as unethical or situationally ethical, or right, if you're not meeting these behaviors, then we have to coach you. And so there's, just as folks are held accountable for performance results, and there's all kinds of dashboards that measure market share and how many widgets are sold ad nauseum, very rarely is that the case around the respect idea. So if results are the only thing, then respect doesn't matter. Well, in the organizations that we've seen, respect matters equally so.
Yeah, it's you talk about the respect shortage, and in a world today where, you know, we hopefully one day will come out of this pandemic crisis, but we're seeing some real shifts within the workplace, and a lot of leaders are very concerned about them. You know, we're seeing, I think they're calling it in the United States the Great Resignation shift. We're seeing businesses putting their hands up saying they can't find staff, no one wants to work, you know, for whatever reason. And so I like one of the concepts that I saw on your website, Chris, where you talked about it's not a labour shortage, it's a respect shortage. So talk me through that. What do you mean by that?
So,
Mark, you want to dive in?
Yes, we are absolutely convinced, Tony, that most industries do not have a labor shortage. Now, there's exceptions to that rule. If you look at the world of hospitality, restaurants, bars specifically, people there have just said, you know what? I've learned over the last 18 months that is not how I want to run my life. That is, I don't want to be up until 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't want to be closing until 2:30. I want to be home more. I want to have a life. And so the restaurant industry is significantly impacted, but they're not the only ones that are really struggling to find good people. And here's our reality. Even before the pandemic, culture sucked. Most cultures sucked. And now, for 18 months, 20 months, we were given permission to feel freedom, to be autonomous in our work, to decide when and how and where work got done. And now we have a whole bunch of old white guys, mostly old white guys, who are saying, forget the last 18, 20 months, get your butts back in the office. We're going to go back to the old normal. Well, nobody wants that. No, we've actually learned how to enjoy life this last year and a half, and I don't want to get back on the train every morning. I don't want to get home at 7:30, 8 o'clock just in time to kiss my kids goodnight, and after somebody else has fed them. I enjoyed certain aspects, not all of it. Homeschooling was a bear for everybody. I have a 14-year-old. I get it, but we learned what was more important. So now the concept of going back to the old normal, no, it just doesn't make sense for the majority of people in Western civilization. Unless they're starving, unless they're about to be evicted, they're not going to accept or re-accept that old normal. They're going to go find a place where their work matters, the mission matters, the people treat me with respect, I can treat them with respect, but I'm not going back to the old normal. Well, we're calling that a labor shortage? No, that's a respect shortage. If we treated people with respect, and Tony, the companies that are treating people with respect, that have great company cultures, do not have a labor shortage. Matter of fact, they have a talent pipeline, because word's getting out, this culture is good. Yeah. This culture is more contemporary. This culture is more giving and purposeful, and I'm going to go apply over there. And so no labor shortage for if your company has a great company culture, you're probably not facing too much of a labor shortage right now.
People feel valued in an organization will usually stay in that organization and give over and above because they're aligned to it. They know that they're valued. They're not a number.
Yeah.
And organizations that don't value their people, and I guess I should rephrase that. They ultimately or accidentally fall into the habit that their people aren't the most important thing within their organization. Exactly. I don't think there's a leader that goes out there every day and says, I'm going to undervalue my team. But they just don't know how to show that they value and respect their people.
Well, Tony, we've also seen, again, a more autocratic, command and control, my way or the highway leadership philosophy that's been very, very well embedded. I mean, yes, it even started back in the agricultural age. It was certainly reinforced in the industrial age. But here in the social age, way back when there was a website called disgruntled.com, and that's where people would go to complain about their lousy bosses. Well, now it's glassdoor.com, which is very highly regarded, very, very carefully let's call it cultivated, so that the feedback is very honest, and it can be very, very brutal. But what we realize is that as we think about this gap, this break, this pandemic-driven closures, people are also thinking about, when I worked for you before, you never gave me any praise, you never validated any of the work I did. I'm not going back to that either. Even if you pay me more, I'm not going back to be kind of under somebody's thumb. That's just not what I can do now. And the other interesting overlay is younger generations, Gen Ys, Gen Zs. They're not going to put up with command and control autocratic. They want freedom, they want flexibility, they want challenge, they want growth. And an old school mentality isn't going to offer them that.
You can certainly understand why there's a disconnect out there at the moment. We've got, I know with some of my clients that there's almost been a reversion back to type of them trying to seek control or take back what they perceive as a loss of control. And then at the same time, they're dealing with a workforce that have suddenly been allowed to be just as productive, or in many cases more productive, working on their terms from their own home office. So we've got this real disconnect in so many organisations, and I'm pretty comfortable that they don't see the way through in many. What do I have to do as a leader to shift and lose that lotus of control that I'm looking for, and actually trust my team that they will continue to be productive?
Yeah. Tony, leaders did what they had to do for 18, 20 months without reservation. They had no choice. The idea of handing out freedom and autonomy and flexibility, that was not prescribed. That was not a token.
It wasn't driven by the leader.
It wasn't a token of generosity. Yeah. It was forced upon them. And now, and you said this best, Tony, now they want to take that back. Well, that protectionism, that attempt to re-control the domain is exactly what's driving people away. And, Tony, it's a symptom of what we call in Good Comes First the boomer male syndrome. It's almost always, not all the time, but almost always, an older white male that is very secure in how he's always led. And yes, I was a nice guy. I let people work from home for 18 months, but now I need to retake control. Well, Tony, you probably saw the stat. Buffer had a survey just out recently on this. 97.6% of the people surveyed, tens of thousands of people surveyed, said they want to work from home at least part of the time for the rest of their careers. 97.6%, right?
Wow.
Which mirrors exactly what Chris and I are seeing in the
huge.
field. Chris, maybe you have recently, but we've never talked to anybody who said, I like the old way better. I mean, hundreds of people that we talked to, nobody's ever said, oh, good, the pandemic's over. Let's go back to work and be miserable. Nobody has said that. But that's exactly what these boomer males are asking us to do. And the other stat that's out there is 84% of CEOs want people to come back to work, but only 10% of people in that survey wanted to come back to work full time. Well, you use the word disconnect.
Wow.
I think that may be the definition of disconnect. And until we get leaders to see that the old normal didn't work and the new normal was challenging, but somewhere in the middle is the next normal. And we can take the best of what worked pre-pandemic, mix it with what's worked over the last 18, 20 months, and we can, with our employees, with our frontline managers, with our fellow executives, co-create the next normal. And now, labor shortage? No, because we actually allowed people to be part of that process. We actually invited them in to have this discussion. Well, what better way to help people feel valued and respected? And so that's what we're trying to get people to do with Good Comes First is let's just start a conversation rather than revert back to dictatorial, autocratic, I need to protect what I used to have. I need to reclaim control. Let's just start a conversation.
So how do you use what you guys do with organizations? So what are some of the steps that you take with them?
We've got a process that literally 30 years ago I began to stumble upon. And over the years, through trial and error, it's become a little bit more consistently applicable. And it doesn't change from industry to industry. It doesn't change with generations. It's a process that allows us to gather some information. And that's the first phase is discovery. We do interviews. We interview senior leaders, mid-level leaders, frontline staff, to learn how the culture operates. And we always get insights about stuff that works well. And we get a lot of feedback of stuff that just sucks. It doesn't make sense. It's demeaning. It's frustrating. And so the first real kickoff we have with senior leaders is a couple of days offsite. Obviously, over the last year and a half, we've done a lot of Zoom meetings, right, virtually, and it works very well. Because what we have to do is present this information and say, this is a point in time. We interviewed 40 people or 70 people, and these are the themes. We didn't say who said what, because that doesn't matter. But by being able to kind of pull away the layers and to allow senior leaders to see what people are really bugged by and what they're frustrated by, and then leaders can go, well, I didn't know people were going to be so frustrated with that. Well, okay, now we've asked, and now hopes are being raised that we're going to fix it. So let's kind of go down that path. So the next phase is the define stage, and it's what Mark referred to with us helping leaders. What are your 3, 4, 5 values? You may already have them on the walls, and no one pays attention to them because no one's ever been held accountable for them. Or you haven't even defined them in measurable ways. So let's get them behavioralized. And that's literally a full day to kind of say, what behaviors do you see today with someone in your business today who models integrity really well? Oh, she does this, she does that. Good. Let's steal those behaviors and offer them up to everybody. So that definition process literally helps them decide what's the respect side of the equation. We want results, but we also must have respect. Let's define what it really looks like here. And then we charge them with congratulations. Now we're in the align phase, which typically takes 12, 18 months, along with the refine phase, which is a little bit more pointed of focus. But the align phase is model, coach, celebrate, measure the tar out of things, mentor folks who aren't aligned, celebrate those who are, and continue ad nauseum, so that the respect side has got very formal expectations. They're measured and people are held accountable for them. Now that begins to significantly change the employee experience, the way people are treated every day. The refined piece literally gets to a mentoring task where if you've got somebody who is thumbing their nose at your values and behaviors, how many chances do you give them? How much time do you allow them? And we literally coach, if you've got someone who has demonstrated an antipathy for your values and behaviors, lovingly set them free. They're never going to work out well for you here. Set them free, do it in a kind way, and then the rest of the folks are going to go, you're serious.
So that's a very detailed process and quite lengthy. And, coming from another leadership space, I can certainly understand that. Why? Why? Because we're actually shifting behaviours and we're shifting focus.
Yeah.
A lot of organisations probably, and I've seen this myself, they do a values session. It's a full day event. It all gets emotional. People have a couple of tears. We define a beautiful, powerful set of values, and then the next day they go back to work and it's the way it was. And one of the things that I've started just from my own personal aspect is that one of the failings of that particular system, is that then it's not being embedded in and the organisation itself isn't being held accountable. But what I'm also seeing is that the values that they talk about on the day aren't the values that are present in the workplace at the moment. So we're talking about two different sets of values. We've got an aspirational sense of values, which people would love to have. And then we've got the reality of the situation, which may be totally at odds of what the aspirational value is. So when you go through a single day process and you say these are going to be our aspirational values, we're actually not taking into account that discovery stage, which is what you've talked about. Defining what it actually is now. This is our reality. And this is the values and the behaviours that we actually have within the organisation right now. Now, do we find that acceptable, or do we wish to change? I suppose is one of those questions that organisations have to be asked.
You asked Tony how we get started, and we typically get started our work. Leaders already know there's a problem. Leaders know, they have a sense. They have, they're losing good people. They're losing the battle for good people. In the HR team comes and says, "Look, we had 30 people this quarter that we had our eyes on. We only brought in one of them. We're losing them to the competition because of our culture." So typically, they may not know exactly what's wrong, but they know that it's not right, and so there's already a sense there. Now, that doesn't work out all the time. We had a client very recently, actually, that we did the discovery process. We reported back to the leadership team what we found, and the person in charge, the person who actually brought us in to help, create this new normal, next normal, said, "Oh, great, we gave all these people a voice, and all they did was bitch." And he didn't. I mean, we just sat there and we can't help you. Like, with that approach to this, we can't help you.
Follow that?
Right? So it doesn't work for everybody, but most people, especially now, especially post-pandemic or near post-pandemic, fingers crossed, they're looking at their company and is this really the company we want to be? When we show them the discovery, and that's their benchmark, they look at each other and go, "Is this really the kind of employer we want to be? Is this how we want to be perceived? Is this our brand?" Because our About Us page doesn't say that we're a bunch of autocratic jerks. Our About Us page makes it sound pretty cool. Right? So which one are we? Yeah. Right? So usually that discovery phase opens up a lot of minds, and usually hearts and minds and eyes, and now we can get down to work. And that's the fun part for us. And that's exactly what we try to accomplish within the book, Good Comes First. We lay out our process throughout the entire book, except the interviews, because we can't do that for you. But we didn't want this book to be one of those, oh, good, it's a great theory, but it's not practical. No, the book is everything we do in our practice. It's tactical and it's practical practical and it's executable, and even people who don't even know they have a problem yet can jump in and go, oh, well, I'm not asking that question. Oh, I didn't think about that. We never discussed this issue over here. What's funny about that, Tony, is the same leaders who do that have been spending millions of dollars and a dozen years on employee engagement and poor retention and leadership issues. And well, how do you increase employee engagement if your company culture sucks? You can't make people feel more engaged if they don't want to be here, right? So we see a lot of these things as leaders are very willing to work on the symptoms, but they're not willing to address the problem, and the problem is usually culture leadership.
Yeah. It's a fascinating insight and becoming more and more relevant today, and it's just something that's not going to go away, and people and leaders everywhere need to embrace the concept of building and owning the culture and really trying to deliver a workplace of differentiation so that they can compete in the market. And with the market becoming more and more global, it's not just about having the best workplace culture in a local geographic region nowadays. It's about attaining to be part of the world's best, because if I can do my job here in Australia and be paid by a company in Chicago, for example, that's a global marketplace for my services. And that's what more and more people are starting to see, the opportunities as they've embraced the work from home culture. They've embraced the freedoms and the productivity that it can bring, and they're looking at further opportunities. And why can't I work from Google while I'm sitting here in my office in Brisbane? So it's a fascinating insight, and it's one that I hope that you gentlemen succeed in really changing the worlds of at least a number of businesses and really starting to set the ball rolling. So I'm just going to go through some of my general today's leaders questions now, and how you want to answer this, I'll leave it to you. So first up, I'll start with maybe Chris. Who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
It's interesting. I in my first book back in 2014, I spoke about my best boss, and I was a nonprofit executive, as was he. And I speak very highly of Jerry Nutter, who was slightly twisted, amazingly funny, but also very insightful about we're not having the impact we want. And so if people don't feel like they can rely on us for protecting their kids and doing swim lessons while not browbeating their children, that kind of thing. And I followed this guy for 5 years talking about stalking, but I learned so much about praise and about validation and about catching people doing things mostly right or very, very right. And that's a classic Ken Blanchard kind of mantra, and I was able to work with Ken for over 20 years. But the idea of great bosses, again, there's a handful of them. And hopefully we've all had that experience, but there's many more okay bosses, and there's some world-class lousy ones. And of course, I was inspired by the lousy ones too. It's like, oh man, how can he or she believe that that's a smart thing to say, that that's a smart tone to take, that's going to build people's confidence in the leadership moving forward. And so for me, I still go back to Jerry Nutter and look at how did he make us feel, and how can we help leaders create an environment where there's no fear, where there may be frustration, but it's because it's kind of a cool project and it's a hard project, and how are we going to get this done? And Mark has alluded to, we've seen some pretty cool companies, everything from WD-40 and Five Below and Genentech, kind of the mother church of biotech in San Francisco, and seeing remarkable leaders be able to inspire their teams to go well beyond anything those teams even thought they could accomplish.
And yourself, Mark?
Well, I've been lucky. I've had a handful of really good bosses my whole life, and I've also had bosses that suck, including me. And I go back to the game of baseball. I've coached baseball
Yeah.
for 35 years, and almost everything I've learned about leadership came on the diamond. And if you want instant feedback on what kind of leader you're being, just look at your 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and look how they're looking back at you. And are you getting through? Are you getting the rolling of eyes? Are you inspiring a love of the game? I mean, this is work, but it's still a game. And my goal was always to inspire that love of the game, because I knew my win-loss record wasn't the critical factor. I was never focused exclusively on results as some coaches were. I was judged by how many of my 12-year-olds are going to go on and play high school ball and college ball, and how many of them are, when they become dads, how many of them are going to coach their kids because they love the game. And so that's framed everything I know about leadership.
Excellent, excellent. So what's the vision going forward for both yourselves and I guess hopefully the book? So what can we look forward to?
Well, as we've alluded to, Tony, this is a process, and it's often a 1 to 2 year long partnership that we work with leaders, mostly because after you kind of get rolling and there's some momentum built, there's more pressure on those leaders to make sure that they don't screw it up, right? They don't throw any bricks in the way of this machine going down the road. And so we serve as coaches. We coach their executive teams. We coach their divisions. We take it down to the front line if that's appropriate. And so there's a piece of this where we really want to have leaders at all levels in an organization understand this is a much better way to manage people. And so our hope is that for the next 10 years, we're able to continue to work with 4, 5, 6 clients a year. It's an involved process. It's not like we can build a car and sell it to you in a day, right? There's a bit of a process and us learning about you. I mean, we were on the phone last week with a client that's looking at us helping kind of evolve their culture. They're calling it Culture 2.0, and I've been with them and Mark with them for 4 years. So they really do see the benefit that there's younger people coming in, and they don't talk the same as the old baby boomers or right those influenced by baby boomers. And so we're hopeful that leaders read the book and put this into action and see that it makes sense. We're hopeful that if we don't have to do any consulting anymore because leaders are so good at this, how cool is that? I can play guitar more.
Yeah. That's an aspiration, isn't it? So, and one that we certainly should be striving for, because the more we can understand how culture actually works and can improve our organisations, the better off we're all going to be, I think. So, gentlemen, I'm hard up against a deadline here, so I could talk to you guys all day, to be honest, but I do need to bring it to a close, unfortunately. So how can people connect with you?
Tony, we'd love it if everybody would just go to goodcomesfirst.com. Not only will you learn more about the book, you'll learn a little bit more about us and our style and our approach. And we hope people, when they get there, they'll take a moment just to reflect a minute and say, what kind of culture do I have now? What kind of culture do I want? Do my people want? And how do I get from point A to point B? And hopefully the book will help, and we're here to help too if anybody needs us.
Excellent, excellent. Gentlemen, it's Chris and Mark. It's been a pleasure having you on the Today's Leader. Thank you so much for investing in the leaders of today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Tony.
Thank you, Coach.